What's going on? Welcome to Tech with Sean, and today I'm doing a comparison between two similar looking but actually quite different laptops. This is last year's Zephyrus G15 with the Ryzen 9 and RTX 3070, and this is the new 2022 M16 with the i9 and RTX 3070 Ti. So let's take a look at both of these and see how they're similar and how they're different. Alright, I've got these set up side by side, and one of the things you may notice is that they look extremely similar to each other, and they basically use the same chassis. The screen, like the top part of the shell, is different because one is 16 by 9 and one is 16 by 10, but the actual base part of the chassis is pretty much identical. When they're closed, the M16 is a touch thicker, but when they're not, it's basically the same. And I believe that's because the actual lid, the top part of the clamshell, is a little bit thicker on the M16 because of that 16 by 10 screen. You can also see the darker color of the M16, and that's because of a soft touch finish that it has, whereas the G15 has just the bare metal finish. I kind of prefer the metal finish myself. It feels a little smoother and sleeker, whereas this has a little bit of a more rubbery or plasticky feel. It's all personal preference, but this does seem like it'll wear and get dirty more than just the regular metal chassis. The trackpads, keyboards, speakers, and basically all of the rest of the inside that cosmetically is the same, but inside they're totally different because one's Intel, one's Ryzen, one's DDR4, one's DDR5, and so inside the guts are totally different, but they're really similar on the outside. As far as the screens go, both have really nice screens. The one on the 16 is obviously a little bigger and it's a taller aspect ratio. They both have really good color gamut. They're both like 100% sRGB. I believe there's actually a little better color accuracy on the G15, but it's nothing you're really going to notice if you're gaming. The biggest functional difference I would say is the brightness. Right now I have the G15 on maximum brightness, whereas this one is only up about halfway. I believe the G15 maxes out at 350 nits, but this goes up to 500. And if I turn it up, you'll be able to see a difference probably. Maybe not so much with the auto exposure of the camera and everything, but this one's definitely brighter. I guess I have different stuff on the screen too, so that might make it harder to tell the difference. This one over here, the G15, it's 2560 by 1440, 165 Hz, and this one is 2560 by 1600, 165 Hz. Both of them have adaptive sync or variable refresh. I believe this has some kind of just adaptive sync, and this has FreeSync because it has an AMD processor, but both of them should be able to give you smooth gameplay. They both have good response times too. Neither one is like ghostier than the other by any noticeable margin, I would say. Their respective power bricks are a little different too. You can see here on the left, that's the G15's 200 watt charger, and then on the right, that's the M16's 240 watt charger. So neither one is like super huge. They're both way smaller than like the Legion 5 Pro, but the G15 charger is noticeably smaller and lighter. On the inside, as far as upgradeability goes, they're both pretty much identical. They're both going to have half the memory soldered on and then one DIMM slot that you could take the stick out of and replace with a larger one. This one's DDR4, this one's DDR5. They both have one SSD installed with the operating system, and then there's an extra M2 slot. I believe this one's Gen 3. This one's Gen 4, so you could still use a Gen 3 drive, but the newer one has the option to support Gen 4 M2 drives. But we're really interested in the performance, aren't we? So let's load up some stuff and see how they compare. I'm going to start off with 3D Mark Time Spy, just to give us a general performance idea, and also because it gives us separate scores for the GPU and CPU. I'm going to run both of these in the turbo profile. I'm going to record this on both of these, but I will say the fans on the M16 are noticeably louder. I've only opened up 3D Mark to the menu, and you can see here that in Armory Crate, it says we're up at about 50 decibels already, so just sitting on the menu screen, it's already up to about 50 decibels. Okay, now the fans are on jet engine mode, so I'm going to go ahead and put my microphone right here over the trackpad. So according to Armory Crate, it is up around 52 decibels, but we got a really good score. We got 10,851 with 10,500 on the GPU and 13,200 on the CPU. So that's a real beefy score for a gaming laptop. Alright, so now we're gonna fire it up on the G15, and I just want to show you that by comparison, when it was super loud when I just brought the menu up over on the M16, here on the G15 it's sitting at 34 decibels right now, and I believe we're on turbo. Oh no, we're on performance. Now we're on turbo. Gotta make sure it's the same. So I guess it went down to 0 on turbo. This one stays quiet, I'll tell you what. There's definitely a temperature difference between the Ryzen and the Intel chips. Alright, here we are, we got Time Spy running on the G15, and you'll see that it only goes up to 100 watts with dynamic boost, so it's a lower wattage GPU on this version. So it's definitely not going to get as high of performance as the M16. However, it's much quieter. Even here on the turbo profile, so far it's remaining pretty quiet. The fans are starting to kick up a little bit. We'll see what it does in this next test. So now they're going pretty good. We got the CPU up over 70C. I'll put my microphone down there so you can take a listen to it. So it's actually running pretty quiet right now, and this is on the turbo profile. So I don't know what the difference is between this and the M16, but even in the turbo profile, this machine is just so much quieter. Now comes the CPU test, so I'll compare it to how the fan sounded on the M16. So when it's in a CPU only workload, you can see the temperature still really gets up there, but when you're doing something more mixed like gaming, it stays a lot more tame. And you can see our overall score here, we got 9,453, so this is noticeably lower than the M16. But if you look at the breakdown, a lot of the difference is the CPU score. So there's only, like a few hundred point difference. It was a little over 10,000 on the graphics score, but the CPU score is crazy. Like this is 8,000 and the Alder Lake chip got 13,000, so that's like a huge whopping difference in CPU performance between the two. But as you can see, the graphics score isn't really that different, and that's because this chip, even though it's not as fast as this one, it's already pretty much fast enough to fully saturate either one of these graphics cards. So most of the gains that you're getting from the new generation is not from going from 3070 to 3070 Ti or adding 20 watts. Most of the performance increase is that Alder Lake CPU, at least in basically all of the tests that I've seen so far. So next I'll run some different benchmarks. We'll run them on one and then run it on the next one, and then we'll compare the results between the two. Okay, I ran the Forza Horizon 5 benchmark on both of these in turbo profile, and I used ultra settings, and both of them were at 2560 by 1440, even though this is 16 by 10, just to get an even comparison. And on last year's G15, we got 63 frames per second, and then on the brand new M16, we got 77 frames per second, so around a 10% performance increase. It's not really like generational leap or game changing, but it's also nothing to sneeze at. Okay, next up we have the Cyberpunk benchmark, and both of these are running at 1440p on the RT medium preset, and then I moved the DLSS over to balanced, so 1440p RT medium balanced DLSS. And you can see that the new one's getting maybe 3 to 5 more frames per second, I would say. So it's a little bit of an increase, but neither one of these are really going to get over 60 frames per second all the time with ray tracing unless you drop the resolution or do super aggressive DLSS like maybe ultra performance or something like that. If you're okay with lower RT settings though, you could get it back up over 60. I believe that the newest patch actually increased the GPU load for if you do RT shadows, because now it is affected from all light sources. So maybe if you did ray traced lighting and reflections but not shadows, that would get it up over 60, but I was just using the preset to show the performance difference. Next up is the Assassin's Creed benchmark, and I ran this one at 1440p, but I accidentally ran this at 1600p, and even with that difference, this still got 67 compared to only 59 on the G15. Now, Assassin's Creed Odyssey is a super CPU intense game, and I think that the Alder Lake chip is the reason we're seeing a big performance difference on this. So Assassin's Creed Odyssey, more CPU intensive games, you're going to see more frames on the M16. Next one we got going is Red Dead Redemption 2, and let's see, right now we're getting 69, 70 frames per second on the G15 and about 87, 89 on the M16, so we're seeing a bigger difference here. And maybe that was just inside, now it's closer to about 10% again. So in general, I would say in most GPU limited games, you're going to see about a 10% difference. And if it's a CPU limited game, you're going to see a bigger difference, maybe up to like 25% even on the Alder Lake chip. As far as the sound quality goes, I think both have really good speakers, and I think they're pretty much identical. I brought a video up of mine that has music, and I'm going to put my microphone right here, and then I'll play some clips back and forth, and you'll be able to see I think they sound pretty much exactly the same. We'll start with the G15. And now the M16. Oh, I have it on mute, of course. Alright, well thanks for watching along on that comparison. I think that in the end, both of these are nice machines. Both are built really well, nice screens, nice speakers. The newer one costs more. It's going to give you about 10% more performance in GPU limited scenarios. In CPU limited stuff, more, up to even like 25% more frames per second. It does have a couple drawbacks though. This older one, it's going to give you better battery life, and I personally prefer the metal chassis as opposed to the soft touch stuff, but that's more subjective. This also has newer features. I mean, this has DDR5 RAM, it has a PCI Gen 4 SSD, but even counting that stuff, you saw that in most games it's only adding up to about a 10% difference in performance. So if you're on the fence and you're wanting to save a buck, I think it may be worth looking at last year's G15, especially when it goes on sale for around $1,500, because that's almost $700 less than this, and you're really getting 90% of the performance. However, when this starts to go on sale later this year, that might change that equation a bit, and I'm also interested to see what they do with the 2022 G15 that's supposed to come out later this year. So I hope this was entertaining or worthwhile. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you in the next video.